we're not a fly on the wall of Mar-a-Lago.
Let's look at this from the political perspective. The ability to put in place things like internment camps becomes way easier if the old guard leaves. If there aren't a bunch of people who are like, that makes no sense, we know it works. If the future is conferences about how do we do better internment camps, this was all for nothing. There's one mantra since January 20th. It has been efficiency. And you and I might know that there's a complexity to human beings, but it's really going to come down to, were you efficient in what you delivered?
Yeah.
If you have interruptions of service, we'll be deemed inefficient. Inefficiency means we take your money. And I think fiction is presented as reality. What's easier for a politician to say? That we failed at policy, or that there's a bunch of failed people?
Wow.
And those failed people will be pigeonholed to fit an agenda relative to the partisanship that surrounds the issue.
It's hard to explain what is happening in the world. What I can say is we are in a crisis. And homeless services, nonprofits, it's an extreme crisis. I asked Iain De Jong to sit down and have an honest, authentic conversation about homelessness in Trump 2.0. I've given a lot of thought to the topic we're going to hit today, just because it's so top of mind or top of anxiety. I even did a little research, like what are other people saying? And I thought, because you're Canadian,
I am.
the best place to start is, what do you think about being our 51st state?
I don't want to be your 51st state.
Well, I'd love to have you, but I can understand why.
But so here's the thing, is that as one of your closest friends and neighbors with a you, it is really difficult when you have such a complicated and fickle friend.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's a challenge.
Right.
Now, my existence, I grew up on a border town. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan was just the same as my backyard as everywhere other place I grew up, right? I could go across, fill up with gas, grab some milk, come back, but it was just part of the backyard. But in recent times, there's been this like increased difference that you start to see. And part of it is values, right? In terms of what we value relative to people in need. Yeah. But the other thing that's really kind of difficult in all this is the gravity of the situation seems to be reduced to sound bites, right? 51st state, Trudeau being the governor, right? Like it's
and that's childish.
It's baiting people in to a conversation where at a time where I will say, patriotism in being Canadian has probably never been as high in my lifetime as it is right now.
Yeah.
And part of the kind of reality that we have right now as well is that Canadian politicians are still looking to the U.S. for policy ideas and policy solutions relative to homelessness, which is near and dear to us. So I'll give you an example where I live. I live in the province of Ontario. About a dozen mayors wrote to the premier, which is the equivalent of a governor in Canada, more or less, and said, we really think that we should make unsheltered homelessness illegal. And what did they cite as their justification for it? Want to guess? Grants Pass Supreme Court decision. That's a good piece to follow to put the authorities back into the hands. Like it's just, it's interesting, befuddling. It is confusing and it is heartbreaking all at the same time.
And fucked up.
It is completely to the point where you just say, I don't know what we as a society actually feel about homelessness and people who are homeless at this time, right? Is it that it's like the more that we can strip away people's humanity, the more that we can strip away their rights, the more that we can do horrible things to them, the otherizing? Or is it that, you know what, government has no role, right? Let's just let society take care of it. And I think both are really flawed.
Yeah. Well, when I started that conversation,
Yeah.
I had an overwhelming feeling that I needed to apologize to you for America. And then when you said Grants Pass, I was like, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Well, listen, we're the ones who usually say sorry for things that aren't our fault. So this is very good of you to do that. I mean, I have lots of other, I think, legitimate questions about America.
Yeah.
Some of which are humorous, some are not. But in this space of trying to end homelessness, when we start to see the changes in the dynamic that gives permission to be cruel as a policy response, you and I had a conversation months ago. Yeah. We've had many conversations since then, but the conversation we had months ago really started to speak to, I think, the initial forays into the cruelty that we're about to see. And what I really wish had happened is that every person in our sector had done at least two things. One, read the section on HUD in Project 2025. And two, had the opportunity to actually listen to the rhetoric of what the strategy was going to be in a second term. Yeah. Right? This idea of flooding the zone, right? There's so much going on. The level of confusion is so high. And the thing is, people will say, well, I don't think they know what they're doing. No, I think they know exactly what they're doing. And it's working in terms of creating discord and uncertainty in our sector.
And what we're trying to do today is have some kind of a conversation about how we can respond to this madness, focused on homelessness.
Yeah.
And our very first podcast, which was almost a year ago, just different city, same conference.
Yeah.
You and I sat at a round table, and you said, in 6 months or a year, we're going to know what direction this all is going in. I said from the stage, because I was keynote, I said, we're at a pinnacle moment where we're going to lose support for housing. And it's the free-for-all. And the only thing that I can think of, and it's two things, is we have to pick our battles. One of the things I'm concerned with, and I'm seeing, because there's so many advocacy actions, right? Every day Trump does something that wants to trigger off, write your congressman, right? Contact your legislators every single day. And then you got local stuff and you got state stuff. You'll have fatigue after that. People will stop responding. You're going to burn out asking all the time. And the other one, and you know what? I hate it when people bring up self-care unless they offer me a 7-day Disney cruise, because I don't self-care right. And I know that, but just saying, oh, you should meditate or you should do yoga. And I'm like, no, that is not me. So go hand out socks, right? Because I think it's going to be those two things of picking your battles. Because we don't know what's coming. I mean, the other aspect is I've been watching the news and, you know, they're saying, oh, this is what Musk is up to and this is what Trump is. They don't know.
Yeah.
They do not know. Nobody knows. And so you got to pause a little bit and say, maybe we should not respond to that. Oh, shit, that's a really important one.
Yeah.
We've got to go all in.
Yeah, I think at this time, so there are definitely some people where this is their moment to try and balance the absurdity with the world around them with trying to have some semblance of normalcy. And if, you know, deep breathing exercises help people with that, fill your boots. It's not my cup of tea, but I think maybe a bit more tolerant in that space.
By the way, I don't want to do a Disney cruise.
No, well, listen, I also don't think that would be good for you for a whole host of reasons. But the other thing that I think is happening right now, Mark, is more than any other time in my career in this field, especially at a national or international level, I'm not sure we agree on what the mission is anymore. I'm not sure we agree that the mission is to end homelessness and to really get to a place where chronic homelessness doesn't exist or it's remarkably rare, that we have better prevention and diversion, and that if someone does experience homelessness, it's resolved rapidly. I don't think we have agreement on that anymore. I think we're a bit like going with the flow down the river in the canoe, but we don't really have a paddle, so we can't change the direction.
Right.
We may,
good analogy.
You know, we may bump into things along the way that were not foreseen. But I think this idea that we're moving from I want to end homelessness to, in this retreatment space, I want to manage homelessness. and that managing is the safer option, right? It is hunkering down. It is my organization, my program, my community. To heck with the outside world. We'll get people a safe space, but to heck with the housing or the supportive housing or those sorts of things. And I actually think this is a time for more risk. I think it is a time for calculated risk taking, to be able to enter into a space that says, we've heard the critiques, and that's a struggle that I think exists in our sector, to really listen to what is being said about our response and about our effectiveness in responding to homelessness, right? Like, it's almost like we tune it out and say, we disagree with them politically, therefore they have no merit, as opposed to what's driving that critique? Well, it's usually visible homelessness, right? And behaviors that may be associated with some people's visible homelessness. And when we are dismissive of that, or we just offer housing as a panacea, as opposed to talking about the support and the complicated nature of helping people through a process of recovering from their homelessness, we are doing a disservice. So I think doubling down on the mission and providing clarity on that right now is something that is absolutely within our control. Yeah. And I think it is absolutely within our control to start saying, within the current reality, what's the risk we want to take? Because just trying to protect what you have is risk aversion at a time when there's not normalcy.
I agree with you. But I've always been a risk taker.
Yeah.
So it's a little different than me.
Yeah.
And then, like, this morning I was having a conversation with a funder, and they said other funders are contacting their grantees and saying, you better not have gender neutral bathrooms, or we're going to stop funding you. Yep. And the rest all around. And there's significant fears about funding, which makes it harder to take risks.
Agreed. If we were relying upon the same sources of funding to do the same things, or the same source of funding to do something different. And I think innovation, often leads people to a place where it's resources. I actually think it's time for creative destruction. I actually think it's time to hold that mirror up shoulder high to our systems of care and say, you know what? Some of what we're doing isn't working. We don't need more money. We actually need to retract some of what we're doing that's ineffective and reinvest that.
Yeah.
This notion, resourcefulness can trump resources if you know how to use what you have better. And in the space of creative destruction, let's be clear, that is going to freak a whole bunch of people right out.
And what we've been doing as a sector mostly is saying, oh, yeah, it's not working. We just need more money.
Yeah.
More money, more money. And the opposition is saying, they just spent billions of dollars and homelessness is increasing. And we respond saying, that's because you don't give us more money.
Yeah, and part of that, like if we look at the effectiveness at the response to homelessness amongst veterans in this country, when you do marry a certain amount of resource with a certain policy position with a population group that is seen as worthy, you can get good results in decreasing. But I mean, one of the things that I think is perplexing is,
if you got value from this podcast, please give a gift of any size. Your support helps us produce podcasts like this. But also we do daily news, we do documentaries, we do research, we do a lot to make the truth louder.
You can get good results in decreasing. But I mean, one of the things that I think is perplexing is, and I don't mean this to take away from someone's service, is your life worth more because you served your country than someone who didn't serve their country in military service? Right. And that's like a moral question for everybody who's probably listening or watching to the podcast. Because if you think that's true, then of course continue to fund veteran services and get great results. And I don't want to take anything away from the resources for veterans. I just want to say we have an example if we are going to increase resources. But we also have examples of the resourcefulness, which is tearing things down in creative destruction, right? Yeah. If we look at what some communities, one of the communities I'm working with, where they're really focused on how do we improve our street outreach programs? Well, you got to look at data and results. And you've got to say, okay, this process is working or this program is working. This one isn't. They're serving the same group of people. Why is one more effective than the other? Is it just about training one up so they get the same results? Or is it saying, you know what? Some people just don't got it.
Yeah.
I was recently at a bunch of motel sites, encampment resolution sites, right? Like take people from all the encampments, move them in a motel.
That one right there, that hotel right there, is a big one here.
And what I found in being to a number of the sites even though they're all serving people from encampments and many of the presenting needs of people are exactly the same, it comes down to those who are willing to be creative and figure out how to make it work with existing resources, and those that say we can't do things because we don't have the resources.
Yeah. Alex and I, we did multiple documentaries on street medicine, and there was two people, one living in a bus stop, one in a wheelchair, who are now in housing. Great. Through the course of a year, they had 5 different interim housing. 5. I mean, that's
absurd.
Right.
Overwhelming.
But wait.
Oh, there's more.
Whoa, wait.
But wait, there's more.
They were exited back to homelessness a couple of times. While, we lost this housing, go back to the streets, we'll come and find you in a month. Oh, no, it's happening again. Sorry, but you're just going to have to go figure out how to live in a tent again.
Well, and this is, Mark, I mean, what a great point to bring up, even though it's so misfortunate for the people involved. We have systems that are a collection of projects in search of a strategy. What we don't have and what we need right now is that mission-driven leadership that is actually going to say, okay, if these are our objectives, how are we going to get there? And you know what's not going to get us there at this time is people losing interim options that then have to be refound and re-interim housed and refound and re-interim housed until they get to the permanent solution. That's not going to cut it. Because if there's one mantra that I think surpasses all others since January 20th, it has been efficiency. Right? If we look at what's happening, it's efficiency. Yeah. And you and I might know that there's a complexity to human beings, but it's really going to come down to, were you efficient in what you delivered? Yeah. And if you have interruptions in service, we'll be deemed inefficient. Inefficiency means we take your money. That's what I think is going to happen.
Oh my gosh. We don't have a crystal ball to know the future, and we're not a fly on the wall of Mar-a-Lago.
Right.
To understand what the heck they're talking about. It's going to get worse. Personally, homelessness aside, what's really bothering me about everything, if you know anything about Mark Horvath, I do my best to live with integrity. And living in a world where lying, dishonesty, propaganda is normalized. I mean, they've got it down to a system now. Trump or Musk says something, complete bullshit. And then there's this well-organized machine that does one of two things. They try to validate that lie by reinforcing it, or they attack the person that's saying they're being dishonest, which is almost as effective. And they're both happening at the same time at a massive scale.
Huge.
And it's all dishonest. And I'm like, I'm moving to Portugal.
Right.
I mean, because you want to give up, but you can't. You can't give up.
The overwhelming desire for people to quit right now is probably, the last time I saw it like this wasn't that long ago. It was kind of like when we were kind of at the apex of the pandemic response, and we'd burned through our existing staff and kind of the first wave of reinforcements that came in, where people were just like, the workforce was decimated in the homelessness response sector, right? There just wasn't people to do the work. And now I see people who are, especially people who are very seasoned leaders, wanting to quit because they can't navigate what I'll call the post-truth reality that we're in.
Yeah.
It used to be we could reinforce things positively by relying upon evidence, and people reported the evidence. Then there was a period of time where I think we got to a place of repeated anecdotes, which were selective in their fact-taking. Yeah. Now, I don't even think there's anecdotes. I think there's fiction. And I think fiction is presented as reality. And to your point, it's not just the repetition that is making fiction become real to many people. It's the fact that should you speak truth to power in that fiction, there will be an onslaught of people ready to take you down.
Right.
It's vicious.
Oh, it's vicious. And both of us, you more than me, have been the recipients of nasty online attacks.
Huge.
And what they're doing now, and as a marketer, we used to do it many years ago, is, there's chat groups on the side. And, besides the automated bots, it's organized and they come at you, and we're not there. There was a baseless smear campaign about me a couple of years ago. People knew it wasn't the truth. They knew me because I do have integrity. But nobody stood up because, and I get it, they didn't want to step in the shit.
Yeah.
Oh, they're attacking, man, on the right, they do it like crazy. And it's part of their strategy. And I understand, it's horrible when you're being attacked.
Oh, it's horrible.
It's, you know what I mean? The only way I was literally suicidal because I didn't know any other way to stop it. What I'm trying to get to is how the right is using these tactics of misinformation, dishonesty, trolling, harassment in a very organized way. And what we've done is we've escaped from that. Not many people are on Twitter anymore.
No.
Right? And that's not a criticism. I question every day, what the fuck am I still doing here? Who am I even tweeting to, right?
Yeah, I think, so I left X at the height of the venom being thrown my way.
Yeah.
I just couldn't take it. And what I couldn't take was, again, the baselessness of what was being said.
Yeah.
Or the contorted positions of something that I had said that were like, if you look at the context, that is so completely out of context or a completely inappropriate way to interpret my words. But there's no putting genies back in bottles either, right? So once some things start going, I mean, I've had everything from I'm going to put a dump truck worth of syringes on your front yard to I'm going to rape your wife and kids to have you thought about suicide? You should. To all sorts of like heinous things. Like I was in one town and someone said, I'd keep an eye on your daughter. And then was able to name what school she goes to. And I'm in a completely different town. I mean, the thing that, the average listener doesn't perhaps realize is in this work of trying to deal with a complex social issue, you are in the arena, not in the stands, right? And right now, I think there's a number of people who are like, I'm in the arena. I don't want to be in the arena. Right. I don't want to be attacked. Like there's this new wave of attacks that people haven't had. And I'm not saying people should be attacked, but I'm also saying I can relate and empathize to those attacks because that has been a tactic that's been in place for a while, as you said, well organized, and now is getting to a scale and with some new, let's call them victims in that process of trying to tear people down because the master plan of reorganizing the system of care becomes way easier if the old guard leaves. The ability to put in place things like internment camps becomes way easier if there aren't a bunch of people who are like, that makes no sense. We know it works. Yeah. It's only going to work if there's enough of us around to say that isn't actually cost effective or that violates human rights. Yeah. But they need to tear us down. They need to hit a critical mass where enough of us leave that makes the change possible.
I don't remember the person's name. He's one of the wonderful whatever. I don't know even what to call. I wanted to say Trump's lieutenants. That's what came to mind. The Trump armies, the MAGA people he's putting into leadership that will follow him blindly. But he, and I'm paraphrasing, said something, they want to make federal workers' lives so hard that they will leave. Yeah. And that is exactly what's happening. I never brought it into, as you said, the old guard. If they get rid of the old guard, it's easier to do internment camps, and part of what's coming and really is that you got to be prepared that it's going to be extremely hard personally and professionally.
For a while. And I'm not talking a couple of weeks or a couple of months more. And I don't even think it's like just related to a term, right? I think we can take out a specific person or persons.
Yeah, we're not going back.
And be in a position where we say, even if the reality shifts to a Democrat as president in the future, the landscape has been redefined in such a way that systems are being reinterpreted for different purposes. Right? So how do I put this another way? If we look at the criminalization stuff, which you have covered so well with Invisible People and the real human impact criminalization has, it starts with eroding people's sense of security. Then it continues to erode the system of care. Then it pits communities against communities. And then it gets to a place where the initial place where we had unsheltered homelessness, where we might have been trying to help people achieve housing, says, okay, well, we have no choice but to have a balanced approach, right? That there's going to be seen as a deserving and undeserving group of people experiencing homelessness. And let me break this down how I think it's going to happen for you and our listeners. One, I think if you are a family experiencing homelessness and you're new to homelessness, that the degree of empathy is probably not going to change, although the service responses will change. But I think so long as you screen clear on a drug test and you're a parent who's fallen on hard time with kids, that the charitable response will still be there because families are deserving. I think veterans will still be deserving.
Right.
I think to some degree youth, although I pity the youth who identifies as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, etc.
Right.
Where it's really going to hit is the individual adults who are the overwhelming, and to some degree couples without children, but the individual adults who are overwhelmingly the largest majority of unsheltered homelessness in America. That's the population where everything is going to change. Yeah. And that's the population where that narrative has started to work already. I've encountered it. I suspect you've encountered it. People who are listening who work in the sector have encountered it, where it's like, yeah, but no one's treating their mental illness. Wouldn't it be more compassionate if we help people with their mental illness? No one is helping them with their substance use disorder. Wouldn't it be more compassionate if we force them into care for their substance use disorder? No one's helping them get out of poverty. Wouldn't it be more compassionate if we help people with that? And all I'm going to say to that is the word compassion, which is actually a beautiful word. The Latin roots mean to suffer with, has been distorted to actually mean draconian action under the spirit of what feels good for me. And that interpretation of compassion, I think, is cruel. Yeah. I think it's not based upon fact. And I mean, just, to the person who says, but the people in my encampment don't seem well. And they do seem to be up at all hours of the day and doing drugs or those sorts of things. I will say, we can definitely work to resolve that if we have a focus on housing. Yeah. But if we're focused on the wrong things, like there's quick facts, 3 of them. 60 million Americans live with a mental health disorder.
I was just going to ask you.
60 million.
Right.
Almost none of them are homeless.
Yeah.
50 million live with a substance use disorder. Almost none of them are homeless. Yeah. 40 million live with economic poverty. Almost none are homeless. Right. 60, 50, 40, all in the millions. Right. Compare that. Even if a point in time enumeration is an undercount by 10, that's still an order of magnitude of at least 6.
Right. The people that want mental health support, the people that voluntarily want to go into drug treatment, there's not enough drug treatment for the people that want it. That would be the smart, intelligent first step. Instead, everything's getting spun. Oh, we need to force them.
Well, let's look at this from the political perspective, right? What's easier for a politician to say? That we failed at policy or that there's a bunch of failed people?
Right.
It's way easier to say there's failed people.
Wow.
Right? Because if I admit that there was failed policy, then I have to say, yeah, we should have been building more housing. We should have had more voluntary treatment spaces. But we have failed people. And those failed people will be pigeonholed to fit an agenda relative to the partisanship that surrounds the issue.
Transition a little bit before we go too far away from one of the things, and I'm not going to hang here for a long period of time. It's just my communications background always has to come up somehow, is being in this post-truth world. Now more than ever, we have to be honest. Right? What I've told or what I say to nonprofits is protect your story. I now, if I see somebody say something and I go, that's a little out there, or even if it's not, I first, what is the source?
Yeah.
So, we're a news publisher, so we want to be, as factual as possible. But if you're a nonprofit and you're doing gimmicks, or you're doing some kind of funky marketing that could be considered not really the truth, and people are going to say, well, they're not really honest, and you've got to protect it because, trust is going to be the commodity of a post-truth world.
That trust apart, right? I think it's one of the things that you've done really well in the integrity of your storytelling and the integrity of who you are as a person. I think the reason why Invisible People is trusted is because you stayed true to that throughout the entire time.
Yeah.
Right? You haven't wavered even when the sector has wavered. It's also why I've been so inspired to enter into like the YouTube space and do more on LinkedIn and start create content, because I think in the post-truth world and the matter of trust is that people are going to gravitate to sources that they feel alignment to from a values perspective, but also that they feel that they can trust.
Right.
Is this the truth? And yes, some of the stuff that you do and I do is commentary, but a big part of what that commentary comes from is the truthful reality of the existence that's on the streets or in the non-for-profit world. And I think if we look at what you have been able to accomplish by way of storytelling with integrity, allowing people to be the voice of their own story in that space, in a post-truth world, don't be surprised though, if when we see this like emergence of recovery-oriented systems of care is what they're probably going to call them in some respects, right?
Can you repeat that?
Recovery-oriented systems of care, which is code for forced involuntary treatment.
Right.
Right? That's what it's code for.
You've put some serious thought behind this.
Well, it's not my language. I've started to see it showing up in different places. Yeah.
Got it. You're just paying attention.
Where I'm putting my energy, trying to understand the gravity of the situation.
Right.
They're going to come up with their own success stories. And then they're going to come up with competing stories. I suspect that we are about to see, to some degree, a war of poverty pornography. Who can create the most exploitive stories to tell their opinion of what is virtuous and right in the space of responding to homelessness?
So, I have the faith-based homeless services roots.
Yes.
And, they will parade a dozen graduates across the stage, and it's not taken into account or counted the amount of people that they rolled up that, because whatever reason, didn't fit into the box that they wanted. So there could have been hundreds of people that have come and asked for help, but only these 12 graduates, and everybody buys it. Oh my gosh, right? And then there's really no support after that to help them back in. So I'm just trying to validate. I believe your little theory here is probably going to be true, because they're going to start producing content. So that's another thing. You pay attention.
I'm trying.
You do. You're on the content bandwagon. You're cranking it out, right?
I am trying.
And the homeless sector still doesn't get that.
Well, I don't think they're listening to you, Mark. Right? And I think but let's be clear. You have one of the largest megaphones in the sector, and we should be looking at you not just as an influencer, but how you influence our thinking beyond just what you produce by way of content. And one of the things that you really steered us to, and a year ago at the National Alliance Conference, you got into the whole piece around narrative change, right? And essentially, I'm going to paraphrase you, but it was something like, stop with the Lone Ranger bullshit and let's figure out a common agenda.
Lone Ranger shit.
Okay. So I wasn't far off in my remembering.
Lone Ranger bullshit works too.
Yeah. And what have we seen since that time?
The same thing, that you have the national organizations. They've never done narrative change work. But they want to do it their way. And so they're going to do it different than this other organization, So they can only run a campaign for a month. But the change narrative, it's got to be ongoing. And if we pooled together and had agreed on messaging, I mean, the one now that is coming out of the Trump administration, is waste, fraud, and abuse. And they're all repeating it like parrots.
Doesn't matter which station we turn to, it's the same.
Right. And they do the same with the compassion, right? We know housing works.
Yeah.
We know, but it takes a while for housing to be built. And we can't let people die on the sidewalk. That's why we need to force them into shelters or treatment. And if they don't go, let's put them into jail.
So I think many people experiencing unsheltered homelessness in particular are going to face a fork in the road, to use another recently used expression in an email subject matter from someone in the administration. But the fork in the road isn't going to be keep on doing what you've been doing or come with us. It's going to be your choice is jail or therapeutic incarceration.
What the heck is therapeutic incarceration?
Well, I will hold you against
Jail
your will.
with yoga class?
Jail with all the life skills programming you could ever want and more. It will require sobriety, mandatory AA participation or NA participation. It will always be like parenting classes, budgeting classes. It'll be all those things because it'll be otherizing people in a condescending way to show the significance of the service provider is greater than the significance of the personhood of who's being assisted.
So I was a family case manager. One of my pet peeves was they would have nutrition classes for the homeless moms. And, you know, they're not paying attention. They're talking about calories and vitamins and, you know, the 4 food groups and everything else, right? I'm sure there was funding for this. House people thought it was really good. I'm sure academics do it. But the homeless moms were bored.
Yeah.
I was traveling through Kelowna on one of the road trips, and they did it and was brilliant. They did how to cook a $2 meal.
There you go.
How to cook a $4 meal. Well, today's world, it'd probably be start at 10.
Some inflation.
Right.
Yeah.
And the moms paid attention.
Because it's useful information.
Right.
But, I mean, let's even just talk about what this is going to look like, right? I think, to the best of what I've been able to glean, if we go the route of what I've called therapeutic incarceration, or that we'll call a recovery-oriented system of care, what's going to happen is there will be a workforce appetite to deliver that sort of programming. And there will be a group of volunteers who believe it is virtuous and right and that it's correcting injustices. And these are all people who refuse to look at data or information, who actually think, you know what, the best way to teach a budgeting class is to have some middle-aged white woman from the suburbs show up and teach how to do budgeting, who's going to talk about clipping coupons and going to 5 grocery stores because she has a Lexus and can do that. And I'm just going to call bullshit on that and say, if you want to teach a budgeting class, I mean, even to this day, in our current reality, you get some economically poor people to say this is how we get by, right? Let people teach people.
The whole premise of workforce development in today's world with automation around the corner, you know, there's robots now that clean toilets, robots I've seen sweeping floors. Pasadena has the first autonomous restaurant. There's no humans except the people eating.
I passed a robot on the street that was going to do a delivery.
Yeah. At LAX, and I've been at places, London recently, where you swipe your credit card going in and then put whatever in the basket and you walk out and it reads it and there's no employees.
Yeah.
Right? Kiosks, you haven't ordered at McDonald's from a human in a long, long time. So we're training people how to be forklift drivers, which is an occupation that probably is not going to exist in 3 or 4 years. But we refuse to see it. We have blinders on.
Well, and let's bring this back to the central premise then. In the post-truth new reality that we're in, where we're likely to see forced acceptance of service or incarceration, the jail kind, what does this mean for the likes of workforce development?
I know where you're going.
Right? In an era where immigration is seen as a dirty word, that diversity is seen as a dirty word, that inclusion is seen as a dirty word, who's going to do the things that people don't want to do that can't be done by robots?
And you went there.
That's the workforce. We're about to see, I think, a shifting towards a broad group of people who, under the guise of helping people rehabilitate and the importance of work, will be forced to do things that they don't want to do in exchange for a roof over their head.
So I'm going to transition again, because one of the things that I believe needs to change is I've heard the same cheerleading rhetoric. We're ending homelessness. Homelessness is solvable. We're ending homelessness. I say it myself.
Yeah.
Right?
So do I.
You know, there's a few bright spots or whatever you want to call them. Veterans homelessness. You know, Hennepin County, I heard homelessness went up this year. Finland went up this year. So in 41 years, we haven't really reduced homelessness significantly, but we keep cheerleading on that. I think we need to redefine success.
Sure do. Absolutely we do, Mark.
And we need to redefine the success, and we need to see the world as it really is.
Yes. I would say redefining success, critically important. Redefining the metrics that we use to quantify that success, critically important. Redefining the narrative that we use to tell the story of success, completely important. Yeah. And those things need to co-occur. If we don't have a reckoning with what success is in the current reality, everything will feel like a failure. That's number one. Number two, I do believe that without measurement, we won't have integrity relative to accountability in the process. And it'll be just as bad as people making up numbers off the top of their head, which I think is terrible. But if we don't have that story change, the narrative change that goes with success, it is just doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Right. And that's problematic, I think.
Yeah.
And it is also going to be problematic that, it's attributed to Jerry Garcia. I've never seen the actual interview with him saying it, but Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead apparently once said, somebody needs to do something and it's just incredibly pathetic. It has to be us. No one else is coming to change the system, Mark.
Right.
There's no champions from afar. There's nobody like hiding in the mountains waiting to come down and heal us and fix us. If we as a system of care, as a sector of service, as allied human beings who care about other human beings, if we can get our heads out of our butt and figure out exactly how we're going to move forward with a renewed focus on a mission, not a slogan. Because when people say ending homelessness, I think it's become slogan, not mission.
Yeah.
And will people actually make the changes necessary to achieve that mission? Because if it's all about hunkering down now and protectionism, we're doomed.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, I have a love-hate relationship for Alex and her wife, Erin, for talking me into podcasts, because now we're stuck. I think this is episode 27.
Yeah.
So we're doing it.
You are.
But we have authentic conversations. I was saying in an interview earlier, 82% of failure can be attributed to organizational silence. That an employee knew it was going to fail, but didn't feel comfortable enough that they could speak up about it. There's much research into this area, and really we have to listen to ourselves instead of just listen to lived experience people, which has also become a cliche thing.
Well, and let me offer this.
I didn't mean to add that in there.
No, maybe these uncertain times, these turbulent times are also a good reminder that we have a choice, especially those who lead in this space, a choice of how we allocate our time. And what I'm seeing in far too many circles is that they're spending 90% of their time focusing on the problem and 10% of their time focusing on the solution.
Yeah.
And we need to flip that ratio.
Yeah.
Because the problem is the problem, and the problem is going to stay uncertain, and it's probably going to get worse.
Yeah, this isn't a criticism to anybody, because we've got shit coming at us that we've never had before, right? Staffing cuts, funding cuts,
NIMBYism,
forced incarceration.
Yeah.
There's only two genders, right? It's crazy.
And I think amidst all of that is where there's that opportunity again, just to, and I encourage all of our listeners who work in the space to take a moment and ask yourself, why do I do what I do? What's in it for me? Where am I going for help? What's the future I want?
Yeah.
Because again, those things aren't going to be defined for us unless they're defined by us. And there's another narrative that's afoot that says we're just a bunch of touchy-feely, left-leaning, liberal commies who don't have a clue how to actually resolve a complex social issue. And we have to say, you know what? This is expensive, professional, evidence-based work that if we do it right into scale, we do get results. We saw that in like 2011 to 2016 or so, and we saw declines in homelessness across the country. It's not that we don't know how to do. It's that we lost or are losing our resolve to do it well in the current reality.
And most of them are friends of ours, leaders in this space, or even just workers who, no matter what, we're not going to give up.
Yeah.
I don't see me doing anything else.
Me neither.
I might dream about it sometimes.
Don't work on a Disney cruise.
No, I'm not going to. I mean, Netflix had a social media manager starting at $600,000 a year, something I could do pretty good. Right? And then there's another one, Eventbrite. It was $250,000 a year. I'm like, I think about it, but If not you, if not me, who? And then there's people that probably come into this and, stick their toe in the water and say, oh, this is whatever I receive from this, right? It makes me feel powerful, makes my heart glow, whatever. And then they, are like, I'm out of here, right? There's the lifers and the people that are just here short time. That's just a fact. Both are needed. We're probably going to see more turnover on both sides.
On both sides.
On both sides going into this.
Well, I say in our field, we got the difference between bacon and eggs on a daily basis. Eggs are a day's work for a chicken. Bacon is a lifetime commitment for a pig. And I am all in on being a pig. I want to surround myself with pigs. I want to swim in a sea of pigs, because when the chickens come, yes, there's a place, but the putting of the toe in the water isn't going to cut it at a time. When it's going to require a steadfast amount of deliberate attention. I'm going to offer this last thought, and then we probably should wind down.
Yeah. You saw me looking at my watch.
What if people of our kind of lifespan in this work, decades as opposed to, a few years or a few months? What if we're actually just the seeds that never see the flower grow? What if the entire purpose of our mission is to make sure that next generation of leaders actually had some of the barriers knocked out of the way?
There's a lot of truth.
And I think that the scars that I have from doing this work have helped define me as a leader, but they've also helped define my resolve that I didn't want to get the scars for nothing. But I certainly hope that we have raised alarm when it needed to be raised. We've celebrated what needed to be celebrated. We've researched what needed to be researched, and we've constructed the narrative that needed to be constructed. And if they're willing to pick up the mantle, then I have hope.
Yeah.
If they want to go in a completely different direction, if, as I said in our first podcast, the future is conferences about how do we do better internment camps, this was all for nothing.
I forgot you said that. Oh my gosh. And I used to say this, and now it has so much more meaning. And it's easier said than done, is you got to figure out how to feel comfortable in an uncomfortable world.
Yeah.
Because in my, 60 years, there's periods where I felt really comfortable and safe, and now I don't. You can't take it personally, although we do. Sometimes I internalize it. A lot of people are giving all different kinds of advice. Most of it, they're just talking out their ass. You got to figure what works for you. And, as I said, opening up is pick your battles. And if you become the 51st state, will my fishing license allow me to go? Will I be able to fish in Canada?
We're not sure exactly how that's going to roll out yet. Like we haven't figured out like currency, dissolution of a parliament, provincial boundaries, whether or not you get access to eggs, whether they're cheaper. We don't know any of those things.
Well, one of the things, Trump early on when he was running, he said that he was going to do the Iron Dome. Which protects Israel because, Hezbollah and Iran send missiles. Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense, right? My response was, I don't think Quebec is going to send missiles our way. But now things have changed.
Right. Well, see, here's the thing. I don't think the general population in Canada is going to go all ballistic militarily on this. Right? That's the good news.
Trying to end with a joke.
Because
bad joke.
Our approach is the second you step across that border to invade us, just remember, we are super polite. We say sorry for things that aren't even our fault. When yellow lights come up, we hit the brakes. We don't hit the gas. We have funny accents. We live in all sorts of weird and wonderful places, from Moose Jaw to Moosonee. That's the reality.
We have the best name. Saskatoon. Wawa.
Wawa is great. I've been to
Thunder
Wawa.
Bay.
Yeah, it's nice. You've been to the North Shore Lake Superior. And I will say in all that, mess with our shit though, and we also know how to hockey brawl, which means we'll pull the jersey over your head and give you the 1-2
Yeah.
before you even know what happens.
Yeah.
Mark, this has been a really important conversation. All kidding aside, thanks for making it happen.
Yeah. We want to get to a space where we can do these a little more time sensitive. And this was a start. And I thought there's a void here because I see a lot of people talking about this, and rightly so, and just needed some attention.
Let's hope that it helps some people try to figure out where we're at and where we need to go.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review. If you have an idea for a guest or some topics you'd like us to cover, email us at podcast@invisiblepeople.tv.